Hello, everybody. Happy to report from the Central Time Zone of America. We have a special announcement. And this week, we're going to be doing part 1 and part 2 because there's so much material when we include November 8th as election day, but it's also an eclipse. We're going to parse that out, and then we're going to be talking about a lot of comments in that part 2. So hang on for this ride. This part of our CIRF report is simply going to be your standard CIRF report for the week of the last couple of days of October into the first couple of days of November, October 27th, November 2nd. Welcome to all you new folks out there. Big shout out to all the people who believe in these reports enough and seen and experienced the value thereof enough to share it with your friends, family, and followers. So welcome, everybody. Glad you're here. And what we initially do, we don't normally do 2 parts, but I felt like there's so much material packed in here. We also had a lot of new comments, a lot of new questions, and want to cover those in part 2, as well as the total lunar eclipse that's coming up on November 8th. That'll be part 2. So where we start normally for October 27th to November 2nd is the overlap chart. You can see all the circles are overlapped, and I'm dubbing this the wake-up call. And the reason why is because there's a lot of trouble coming in the form of energetic influences on the way we think, the way we relate, the way that we communicate. And there's a lot of disruptions in that because we have Venus Combust, which means she's weakened. She's also in a detriment in Scorpio, so that makes her double weak. And then we have Mercury Combust, so that's a weakened state as well. Later, Mercury, when we get into the eclipse, will actually be Cazimi in this super strong mind. But for now, weakened into obsession, maybe reflecting on the past and rumination and that sort of thing, and communication that might be a little bit more vengeful, that kind of thing. All right. And then also in the astrology, we've got 1 day of grand air trine. That's what we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. We have Mercury square Pluto, which can become a big factor. We have Uranus and the North Node that we've been watching carefully in analyzing the future with that. And we're going to be doing more of that, especially when we get into the eclipse talk in part 2. But including this week. And then Jupiter goes back into Pisces and a T-square. There's just so much astrology. We're going to cover this day by day, but I wanted to give you the overview. The big news, probably the biggest news for all of November, is a major T-square on Saturn, father of time, father of limitation and inner conflict and, challenging. Saturn is T-squared until November 20th. So the majority of November, unfortunately, very, very challenging. All right. So that's the magenta circle. That's the biggest circle. And for the first time ever, I think that the I-Ching hexagram 62 really covers most of the astrology. I think it's included in all of it because there is so much conflicting stuff. But there's such challenges there. And we're going to talk about all these. There's not just one. It's not just T-square on Saturn, but many of them. It forces us to wake the hell up and pay attention. That's really what I think the I-Ching is getting to. So that this pretty much superimposes this blue circle on top of the magenta. So the I-Ching is superimposed over the astrology. Then we bring in the dream bot, and we have a smattering of smaller themes, but time is one, and that's going to be a big one for the eclipse. And so I'm hammering this home now. We're probably not going to be talking about it because we're not going to talk about the dream bot in part 2. So remember this for part 2 is time, and because that's going to be a factor for the eclipse. Making a mark is in there, and then just having a vista or a viewpoint, a view, a physical view is what the dream bot, and that really does match most of the astrology, but mostly center themes of the astrology like Saturn T-square and the Mars square Neptune, which Mars is going to go retrograde. All right, we will get into all the details. This was just the overview. You can just already see it's kind of like a continuation of last week. This tsunami of energies, all different, but all seem to point to challenges, and challenges that make the everyday person, even our surfers who are aware of these energies, wake up and smell the bacon or pay attention. It's the wake up call. Welcome. High congruency score, by the way. All right, let's get started. And we'll do that next. Okay, just a couple of admin notes. For most of you who are watching, when you want to get to part 2, I'm going to put that in the show notes, but I'm going to be recording that after this. So after I finish recording this and upload it and get all the show notes out, then I'm going to take a short break and then start in recording the comments. I'm going to start reading the comments from the last CIRF report. That was the eclipse one, the partial solar eclipse, just the very last CIRF report. And I'm going to answer some questions there, and then we're going to go into the talking extensively about the eclipse and what that means for us. It's a big one. It's November 8th, and that, as most of you already know, it's the same day as Election Day. So it's and then there's some other big things like Mercury Cazimi on that day, extra intense because they're also parallel. We'll get into all that, but look for part 2. And for most of you, unless you're seeing this immediately after I post this first part, it should be down in the show notes, that link to the part 2. All right. And I'll try to put a card up here too as well, but that's not guaranteed. All right. Big shout out to Milos. I'm so happy to see Milos is dedicated in putting out comments, adding to our algorithm. And this one, it's a big shout out to Milos because he won the best comment. We are going to talk about all the other comments in part 2, but just wanted to give you the winner of this week. Milos says, the long-awaited ride is about to begin. Best of luck, filled with love to all. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Milos, and love from, I can honestly speak from all the surfers, back to you. In your home country, Milos. Glad you're here. Congratulations. All right, here's the dream bot. And I think there's 1 or 2 questions from one of the new folks on the dream bot, and I will answer those in part 2. But for now, we have the red. The red arrows are about time, just direct, like October. That is sort of a surprise to be towards the end of October. And then the word October has a spot in the Dreambot. Normally, the months come up in the very beginning of the month. Those words rise, and that's pretty normal, obviously, because we have a timestamp on each one of the dreams that the Dreambot goes and looks at. And all those time spots are whatever the new month is. But it is unusual to have October here listed in the Dreambot towards the end of October. So interesting. And then we have made a mark. We have mark and made. So that together, but then everything else is supporting that. It's an expression of values. It's making a mark on the world. It's you care about something. So now that took me a while to really put that one together. There's some other miniature memes in here, but these were undoubtedly the biggest 3. The third one is a small meme of view, getting a viewpoint or getting a vista, tower view. Small, but worthy of comment. All right, into the astrology we go, and we have a shifting of a new month. So we're looking at the very end. This is to the right side of this vertical line is where we're looking for October. And we started October with 5 retrogrades. We had one of them fall away. That was Pluto. But we lost another one. This one is Saturn. We lost Saturn and Pluto. Those both went retrograde. But we're going to add this week Mars. And so we're going to end October with 4 retrograde planets. That being Neptune, Uranus, Jupiter, and Mars. All right. Then the big one is, Venus is already in Scorpio. She's in detriment now. And what that means is that she is weakened by being in Scorpio. Just the mere fact of having looked through the lens of Scorpio becomes more obsessive. But remember, she's conjunct with the sun within a conjunction outside of Cazimi. So now she's even more weakened in a what's called combust state. So combust in Scorpio, extra weak. I've got an interesting phenomenon coming up with Venus because it's going to make that weekend very intense. I'll get to that later. Mercury is going to head into Scorpio, so now we officially have a stellium, 3 or more planets in one sign, not including. So if you include the South Node, that's 4 spots in Scorpio, so a heavy influence in Scorpio this week. And this is what I was referring to earlier with the intensity. So we have Sun parallel Venus, both in Scorpio, Venus combust, so weakened. So in that weakened state, it's harder to feel harmony. It's harder to relate to other people, hard to feel beautiful, hard to do diplomacy, hard to put artwork out, creativity. But all those things gets more intense, and these are not exclusive. So they don't cancel each other out. So you have a double weakened Venus, and she's going to be very intense with that weakened state. So that's going to make her wanting. It's going to make all of us noticing a stronger sense of urge or wanting more harmony, or wanting more creativity or diplomacy, or all the things that Venus offers. Feeling without those things. And that intensity, or that parallel, Venus parallel Sun, means it's very intense until the end of our CIRF week. This is the end. So now we're in November. This vertical line signifies the first 2 days of November, and then our CIRF week ends. Now, just to give you a little overview of November as a whole, we have Jupiter. It's going to end its retrograde towards the end of November. About the same time, you have a Mercury conjunct Venus. That'll be really interesting. And that's in Sagittarius, the fiery planet. But the biggest news is not just an eclipse. Now, I don't put the moon on these overview slides because, they'll just be so long. So I had to write in lunar eclipse happens on the 8th, but also on the 8th, we get a super strong Cazimi Mercury. So we have Mercury. This is Sun conjunct Mercury, and it's also very intense. So Sun parallel Mercury. So the intensity is super strong. So on a Cazimi, Mercury is, thoughts and communication basically is, the combust stage. So you get closer and closer to the sun. Is called burned out or combust. And so it's all weakened. So the ability to think, maybe more cloudy thinking. It's hard to rationalize things and maybe a little harder to communicate. Well, then this really close conjunction within 17 minutes, we have this Cazimi. So thoughts and communication become very strong, super strong, unusually strong. There's like an opportunity there. But now with the parallel position exactly at the time of this Cazimi makes it super intense. The intensity goes way up. So super strong cazimi there, along with the total lunar eclipse. There's also a blood moon, blood full moon, beaver moon, a lot there. And we'll talk about that in part 2. All right, Thursday, the 27th of October. You have the remnants of the Grand Air Trine. This is your last day, so it's not going to be our biggest news. It's certainly not the biggest influence. I think probably one of the biggest factors for the energy that you're going to feel starting this week on Thursday, the 27th, is you have 2 combust. You have Venus combust and Mercury combust, meaning that they're both weakened. Now, Venus extra weakened because she's in detriment in Scorpio. And we're getting close to that influence with the South Node. I tend to observe Scorpio clients as a little bit more past-oriented than most. Get sort of stuck and ruminating. But now it's especially true with South Node in Scorpio. So you have that influence. Venus is starting to get that influence with almost a conjunction there, 8 degrees. Then we have, but the combust itself is Venus conjunct Sun, and Mercury is within 8 degrees of the Sun, so he is in combust stage. So awakened thoughts, cloudy thinking, hard to rationalize, hard to communicate. And this is a dying thing, the Grand Air Trine, so it's wheezing at this point. But what's not wheezing is this transforming square, this transformative 90-degree alignment between Pluto and a weakened Mercury. So the square is, while Mercury's weakened, it's squaring off to Pluto, the planet of transformation, death, and rebirth. And your thoughts, the way you think, the way you communicate, is getting reorganized, reignited underneath that fogginess that's developing and getting stronger. And then you also have this Mars, which is currently going direct. Later in a couple days will turn station and retrograde, but in a square to Neptune and Jupiter, both of them. So there is this pressure. That's a square, so big pressure to find and sort out the right action. And this is home of Mercury, so there's this weakened mind, so that becomes difficult. So it's pressurized and it's harder to ascertain right action. We have the pressure to escape is another archetype here, with Neptune as the escape planet. It's also drug use, and it can also be very creative as well. But illusion and fantasy are in there. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be tricky, especially for Mars, because Mars wants to act and do and achieve and produce. And so that becomes conflicted with possibly a fantasy. Now, on the bright side, this is the make your mark. Remember that in the Dreambot? This is really make your mark, because in order to make your mark, you have to have value. That's Jupiter, and value, optimism, wisdom, to know yourself, higher level self. But you have to imagine it. That's Neptune. So the ability to manage, maybe even the pressure to imagine. Did I say manage? I'm sorry, I meant imagine. The pressure to imagine, the ability to imagine, you have to, this is the alignment of you have to imagine. And because it's Mars, I can make my mark. I can imagine it and make it. So there is that ability there, but it's rough and pressurized. Like you're on a stage. Mars is on a stage almost, and gotta perform, have to. The pressure is on now. And then we have the age-old Uranus over the North Node square over to Saturn. And so this is just I want to be different. I want to be unique and free and independent versus, that's the square. This is the way it's going to be. This is lack of Aquarian. Huh? The Uranus wants more Aquarian. Uranus rules Aquarian. So furthest energetically from home is a square to the home of Aquarius, but also on the bright side, this is rubbing raw the way things have been. It erodes it, and Saturn is in Aquarius, the ancient ruler of Aquarius. So we are returning. It takes time to change the status quo, but ultimately that's what Saturn does with enough time, enough pressure, enough, and this has been there for months, long time. So by now, this is wearing off into the collective as more of an Aquarian status quo. Call it the gateway to the age of Aquarius. So freedom, independence, collective good. There's the paradox of Aquarius. We also have disclosure, technology, insight, ability to get along with everybody, friendly, all those Aquarian things. All right. So we get into Friday, and you can see the variety of these big things as we go day by day. Jupiter, the big news is Jupiter backpedaling or retrograding back into Pisces. And so Pisces, and pretty soon when Mercury gets into Scorpio, you're going to have a lot of water signs. A lot of water means a lot of emotion. And then just wait until, let's see, never mind. Disregard what I was going to say. Had to do with the moon. So now we have Pluto square Mercury and synergy with transformed thoughts. We're trapped in fantasy because of this T-square. A T-square is where you got two 90-degree alignments, and so we're trapped in fantasy. But this T-square, this square right here is transforming this weak mind still. So it's both agrees. So you have weak, rational, realistic thoughts and strong and pressurized fantasy and dreams. So this can become very confusing, which dovetails out to your behaviors. The Grand Air Trine has dissolved, and now we get into Saturday the 29th, last day of Mercury in Libra, but already in a weakened state. Now we have a T-square on Jupiter. So now there's this pressure to find optimism in things. We have the moon that's progressed into Capricorn. Emotions become much more forward-looking, maybe fearful, maybe anxiety is the main emotion. It's very common for Capricorns to feel that. But the emphasis or the trap here is getting too philosophical or too optimistic. You can become exaggerated. And with Neptune and Jupiter together, you can feel overly optimistic about maybe drug use or an addiction or escapism in any behavior form, which escapism in repetitive form for Neptune is an addiction. So watch out for this trap. This can really get you because Jupiter's there having you feel possibly unrealistically optimistic, if that makes sense. And so it's going to be hard to see reality. A weakened Mercury and a pressure into Neptune and Jupiter. So a lot of times when we do T-squares, some astrologers will advise you to go to the opposite end. And we have late stage Virgo. We have late stage Virgo be right there. And so, attention to detail. That's interesting. and really think about things before you do them. Be very much methodical. Give yourself a lot more time before you actually carry something out. And Virgo is the realistic, tends to be much more realistic, tends to find all the details, can be even in the exaggerated sense, OCD, but in the healthy sense of using this as your solution on this day of T-square down here, so you can just see things as they are, because Virgo will allow you to do that. Sunday, the 30th. We have Mercury now officially in Scorpio. You have Mercury combust, weakened. You have Venus conjunct with the South Node. So it's already doubly weak. 1, she's in Scorpio. 2, she's conjunct with the Sun outside of Cazimi. And now she's really focused in the past and looking at that karmic past. Maybe even ruminating, obsessing about it. And we have a stellium. And then the other big one is Mars turning retrograde, station retrograde on Sunday the 30th, day before Halloween. What this does is make this square congruent with the other two. So Neptune and Jupiter in a retrograde. And so these planets are all moving now in that retrograde formation in a square. This will keep that square alignment a little bit longer. Mars in retrograde has some pause to it, maybe some procrastination, hard to get motivated now, as if it wasn't hard enough. You had this inner conflict going on, and you had the trickery of Neptune possibly, or this feeling of escape. So now this puts it a lot more, maybe anxiety for some of you, maybe procrastination for no reason, maybe depression even as a feeling, possibly. It is a Sunday after all. And then we get into Happy Halloween. What a spooky alignment here. We have the stellium with a square over to Pluto, and Moon is now in Aquarius on Halloween. But the emotions in Aquarius are a little bit more distant, easy to see. But with the pressure now, ego and a weakened thought pattern, a weakened communication mechanism, and then this missing ability to harmonize and diplomacy with a double weakened Venus, but double intense Venus, makes it a lot. It makes it feel like you don't have any of that. Meanwhile, it's all being transformed by Pluto, and you got a big emotional content here. So very, very spooky. In the other sense of Scorpio is that seeing directly into the eye of death and almost forgetting the rebirth part, like it's a circle. That is the Pluto. Pluto is a ruler of Scorpio, one of the rulers. The other ruler is Mars. But Pluto, the ruler, is squared off from home. So ego gets a big transformation with this weakened Venus, intense Venus, and weakened thought and communication, making it very vulnerable feeling, very scary. Now, this is probably the biggest energetic news of the week, as if those other ones were meaningless. Hardly. But the biggest one, in my opinion, is going to be this Saturn starts with a bang with this emotion. The moon progresses far enough to conjunct with Saturn. So it makes a T-square, double T-square. It's a heavy one, but it's going to stay there until November 20th. So the first day of November, welcome to November. And so we have the first 3 weeks with Saturn, T-square on Saturn. We talked about how this Uranus aspect is fighting with and protesting the way things have been, and that's going to keep on happening but time. Look at this. And you can see how Venus now only 2 degrees away from the south node, the sun only 4 degrees away from the south node. So the past is up there in Scorpio. And of course, we've been talking about Uranus in the north node. So this is freedom into the future, independence into the future. On this side, future, past, and then you got Father Time right here. So I almost have some sort of timeline, and that was also in the Dreambot. So very much appropriate for this discussion, but the collective is already seeing this about a week in advance, is seeing the emphasis on time. And it's not necessarily just the limitation on time, it's the whole conduit. What you're going to see in the eclipse is, just by that very name, eclipse, the Earth is going to eclipse that past part of it, right? Because if Earth is in the middle here, the sun so all these planets conjunct over the south node, that brightness of the sun is going to get eclipsed for a period of time by the Earth, and the only thing left is going to be this full moon over Uranus in the north node. And it's just a bright light beacon for all things Uranus. Beautiful if you're into the Aquarian thing, which I am. So time, it's a time emphasis, past and future. Might be some limitations on time. That's kind of my permanent state of being, is always short on time. But anyway, that becomes much more emphasized in this T-square on the 1st of November. 2nd of November, on a Wednesday, last day of our CIRF report, you can see here this square. These planets will continue to provide a 90-degree turn on Saturn for another 3 weeks. And we have what will be, towards the end of Wednesday the 2nd, is a perfect conjunction Venus directly over the north node. So very much obsessed and ruminating and weakened, maybe even saddened, maybe resentful and vengeful on the past. Don't be surprised if that comes into your field of view. And here's what was going to be a bonus chart. I am going to do this all in part 2. This is what the total lunar eclipse looks like. We're going to go back into our regular CIRF week for part 1. And this attention to details I mentioned, it matches all of the limitations and challenges that we see, and not just the Saturn T-square, but all of those, the Combust, the squares, even the optimism of Jupiter with Neptune can be looked at as a challenge. But let's look at the lines here. Line 1, a baby bird meets misfortune by trying to fly from the nest prematurely. The small must attain a certain stature before making the most preliminary advance. A willingness to attempt difficult tasks too quickly invites unfortunate consequences. And that matches that Mercury Combust with trine over to Mars. So don't get too ahead of yourself. Don't be too quick to act. When you're in a position of weakness, restraint and caution are the order of the day. To push ahead carelessly in such circumstances is to invite misfortune. And line 6, change line, says, at a time when details are particularly important, returning to the comfortable ground of broad visions brings misfortune. Unfortunately, this is the Mercury Combust. So weakened Mercury makes this process even harder at a time when details are particularly important. It doesn't mean the details are not important. It means that they're missing. They're hard to get. They're hard to ascertain, or hard to rationalize, because Mercury's having a hard time thinking. Overshooting the mark. That's interesting. I didn't notice that before, but the Dreambot matches that, overshooting the mark. So trying to make your mark, but overshooting, whether due to pride or inattention, is like a plane coming in for a landing with the wrong readings. So very confusing. This I-Ching influence report or reading really makes it clear, ironically, makes it clear that it's going to be confusing and challenging. We put those change lines in and you get a new hexagram. It's 22, grace and beauty. So it says, I try to extract just the solutions from this text to help us. And it says, apprehend the pure beauty of the ideal. So part of the ideal is to base that on your values. So you're going to see the beauty of your own values and really stick by those and commit to those. But more importantly, take care to lend grace and dignity to small matters while giving the weight of deep and careful consideration to matters of greater consequence. All right. As I mentioned, I am considering the Saturn influence, or the Saturn T-square, to be the biggest influence of the week. So I put that into our conversion chart where we convert from tropical, replace tropical astrology with the rave. So this is hexagram 13 that we will read here in a second. And it also produces true sidereal Capricorn. All right. And that becomes our solution. This is for our solution triangulation based on where the influence is in the tropical. Tropical is the influence. So it's how you're going to feel that energy. And now we're going to transition over to how do we behave. So we start with the rave, hexagram or gate 13, the fellowship of man. Very interesting, but it's not what you think. Universal ideas and values in an ordered framework which inspires humanistic cooperation. Sounds very Aquarian, does it not? Humanistic cooperation, also maybe a Pisces influence as well. But line 6 of gate 13 is the optimist. The ability to accept any limited interaction as a necessary step towards greater union. So, I like that it's optimistic, but it's a choice. As you're going to see, it's a choice to be able to not judge any interaction, even if it's heated or debating. So remember, Venus is ultra weak and wanting more of that. It's very intense, wanting. So hard to get. So it can be your interpersonal dealings this week can be very confrontative. But this line says you'll have the ability to be the optimist and see it for basically as it is. So any interaction, even if it's discontented, can lead our necessary steps towards greater union. So Age of Aquarius, my friends. All right, you ready for the solution slide? Let's do it. Why? Oh, there we go. All right. So for the people who are asleep this week, in my assessment, I think Milos agrees based on his last comment, we're about ready to start what we all knew it was inevitable. And this is going to wake people up out of their slumber. It's the wake-up call. Overview of the influence. Venus conjunct Sun in Scorpio create weakened harmony, beauty, finance, art, diplomacy, and pleasure. But our urge for those things intensifies exponentially. That's because of some weird vehicle going by. Oh, wow, it grabbed my attention. The intensification comes from the parallel. So Sun and Venus are parallel together, which intensifies this exponentially. And the pressured T-squares and heavy Scorpio influences set up spooky energies for Halloween. And then the T-square on Saturn initiates for most of November feelings of lack, challenge, depression, loss, adversity. This week and all the way to November 20th, the ego is expected to be challenged by Saturn in this time because ego, bracketed by Venus and Mercury, the sun is being challenged. The ego through the sun is being challenged by Saturn in this time. And Saturn, everything here, challenging, depression, loss, adversity. So it's the wake up call. All right, here's the solution. In my opinion, I like doing the solution the most. I think the most challenging is to figure out what influence is the heaviest one, the most probable to end up feeling for all of us. But I think the most important of value for me, my practical mind, is to know how to behave, to accentuate the successes, but to reduce the harm, reduce the suffering, because we're all going to have to behave in a certain way. So here's how we do it. We triangulate with the I-Ching on the change I-Ching, the second hexagram, and that one was grace and beauty. Envision and appreciate the ideal based on your values. Grace towards humble positions and consider creating art or whatever. Remember the Venus is the art in the sky. She's ultra weakened, but heavy intensity on it. So what that means is go ahead and do it. You don't have to be perfect. Just create. So it's the urge for Venus, regardless if she's weakened or not. Then the Rave Mandala said Gate 13 fellowship, but it's the optimist, the ability to accept any limited interaction as a necessary step towards greater union. So if you can just keep that in mind on any interpersonal dealings, I think this is going to be a better week for all of us, right? So be more grateful at any interaction, even if it's conflicted. In fact, if it's conflicted, I bet remembering that this is a necessary interaction for greater union later will help you not be so conflicted. And then we have Sidereal Capricorn, who is always ambitious and prudent, very disciplined and goal-oriented. So here's how we work out the triangulation. So we triangulate, go for the overlap of all three, and here's what I've been able to come up with. So Venus is weakened with intensified resulting characteristics. This is a direct energetic match with the Saturn stronghold. And we can include Mercury in there as well, and the Neptune thing with Mars. We can include all those with the direct energetic match of the Saturn stronghold. Abundant with challenges this week, we must be the grace and beauty we so desire in the world. Turn towards more humble positions and offer grace to them. The Rave indicates more tumultuous social interaction problems, which is equally matched with Venus weakened, but encourages us to perceive any social interaction as a necessary step towards greater union. The Capricorn solution suggests concentrating on prudence, responsibility, making goals, and being disciplined. As in last week, avoid reacting too much to fear. That's sort of a Capricorn thing. So avoid reacting too much to fear unless threats are imminent and verifiable. In other words, a lot of what we fear or be anxious about is nothing more than just being up in our heads. So verifiable, meaning that if you have fear, it would not be good to just always get in a habit of just pretending like fear doesn't exist. You should always go, if I'm feeling fear or anxiety, I should look around and go, is there an imminent threat? I do this with a lot of my PTSD clients because they get their fear mechanism and reaction hijacked by trauma. And so I want them to always use the fear and get in the habit of going, what's the threat? Is there a threat? I don't like yes or no questions, but you get the idea. First thing you feel or first thing you ask in your anxiety is where's the threat. Most of the time, it's just made up by the mind. All right. And if that's the case, then now I know it's just my mind doing it. And now I can start my relaxation protocol, which is breathing. You can do progressive relaxation in your mind, so you can divert your mind instead of the anxiety to something much more relaxing. And progressive relaxation is through the muscles, and you can scan the body for tension. Fear, anxiety produces tension. It's for your help. But if you don't know you're doing it, or you don't pretending like it doesn't exist, then you're in sympathetic nervous system mode. And chronically, that's the worst killer of mankind, is chronic non-coping skills for anxiety, stress-related illnesses. All right, continuing on our slide. Even then, so even as you avoid reacting too much to fear, act responsibly and in accordance with your highest values. Don't resist or ignore any challenges presented. See them as growing opportunity or maybe a spiritual lesson or just a lesson in your life. The mantra that I plan to use this week, you can either use this or create your own, but I would like to affirm that the perfect plan for my life is being laid out before me. I am ready. All right, we're at 46 minutes. See why I didn't do the eclipse as well. So hang in there. We're going to do part 2. I'm going to pause this, go record that, and then I'll upload it later. I'll put that link in the show notes below on this video. So go watch that next. And have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next week, where we will put it all together in the week of November 8th. And should be some spectacular fireworks, I would imagine, just based on the astrology alone. All right. We'll see you in part 2. Take care. Namaste.